Imagine riding into battle, your men hardened, your empire undefeated, only to smell death before you even see it. The year is 1462, and the mighty Sultan Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, halts his horse in sudden horror. Before him lies not a battlefield, but a landscape of deliberate madness. 20,000 corpses, rotting, twisted, impaled on wooden stakes, stand in a perfect pattern. Not scattered in chaos, but arranged like an engineer's blueprint. Concentric circles of the dead, spiraling around the city of Targovist. Each stake exactly measured, each body aligned at the same height, as if their suffering had been rehearsed in a ritual older than memory. The stench is unbearable. Flies swarm like black smoke, blotting out the sky. Hardened Ottoman soldiers, men who had marched through blood and fire, vomit before they can draw their swords. And at the center of this nightmare, something even more sinister, a message. Among the corpses, certain bodies form Arabic words, personal words, phrases known only to the Sultan himself. This is not coincidence. This is not war. This is psychological warfare so exact, so calculated, that even the conqueror of Constantinople feels his throat tighten and his blood run cold. The man behind it was not a savage. Not a lunatic drunk on cruelty. No. What stood here was the work of a mind sharpened into a blade. A boy who had been shaped, not born, into a monster. A Christian prince who had been raised in the very palace of his enemy, taught their language, their strategies, their secrets, and something else. Something darker. He had endured things that could shatter a child's spirit. But instead of breaking, he learned. He absorbed. He calculated. They thought they were taming him. They thought they were training him to be a tool of the empire. But in truth, they were forging a weapon that would one day turn against them with a vengeance so methodical that every cruelty carried a signature, his signature. This was Vlad. Vlad III. Vlad Țepeș. Vlad the Impaler. And what you are about to hear is not a horror story. It is a blueprint of control. A history so dark, so precise, that it reveals how power truly works in this world. Once you descend into his story, you will not leave the same. Because you will understand what no man was ever meant to know, that cruelty, when shaped into method, becomes more than violence. It becomes power. Picture an 11-year-old boy walking the marble corridors of the Ottoman Sultan's palace. His father still rules Wallachia, but his bloodline has already been mortgaged as collateral. Vlad is not a guest here. He is a hostage. A living guarantee that his father will obey the Sultan's will. And yet, the palace greets him with silk robes, golden plates, and polished courtesies. They tell him he is honored. They tell him he is chosen. But in the shadows, honor means something else. At dawn, he studies Turkish, Islamic theology, the etiquette of the Ottoman court. By afternoon, he trains in military strategy and horsemanship. But when the sun disappears, when the candles are lit and the music begins to play, that is when his true education begins. The kind that never made it into the official records. He learns that power is not just steel on steel, it is control over flesh, over spirit, over identity itself. He learns submission, not by choice, but by design. Each act of humiliation wrapped in the twisted language of love. Every violation disguised as privilege. They tell him this pain is his honor, that his suffering is a gift to the empire. And so his young mind begins to fracture. Not outwardly, no one sees him break. Instead, he learns to retreat inward, to float above his own body, to watch as if he were studying someone else. And in that distance, he sees what few men ever grasp, the architecture of domination. Beside him is his younger brother, Radu. But Radu takes another path. Where Vlad resists, Radu embraces. He laughs with his captors, wins their favor, converts to their faith. He learns that the price of survival is surrender. And for that, he is rewarded. Handsome. Charming. Loved. While Vlad remained silent, burning, memorizing every detail of the machinery grinding him into compliance. For 6 long years this rhythm repeats. Days of polish, nights of horror. But something strange happens. They do not break him. They sharpen him. Like fire-hardened steel, each wound becomes a weapon waiting to be unsheathed. He studies not only what is done to him, but how. The sequence, the language, the psychological hooks. He learns that power is never brute force alone. It is repetition. Ritual. The slow conditioning of belief. His captors thought they were shaping a compliant prince. What they actually forged was an executioner of empires. A man who would one day take the very methods used against him and reverse them, so that the world would tremble before the lesson he had learned in silence. If you cannot escape your tormentors, you must become something they cannot even imagine. When Vlad finally left the Ottoman palace, he did not return as a broken boy. He returned as a man no one could recognize, not even his own blood. His eyes had changed, cold, analytical, as if every person he saw was already a piece on a board. His brother Radu had chosen allegiance, safety, submission. Vlad chose something else. He had memorized every cruelty, every humiliation, every inversion of truth, and now he would weaponize them. Wallachia was not a throne, it was a furnace. A land wedged between giants, Hungary on one side, the Ottoman Empire on the other. Its princes rarely ruled for long. Betrayal was currency, loyalty a lie. Vlad's own father had been murdered by his boyars, his nobles, men who smiled as they plotted. So when Vlad returned, he did not rule with politics. He ruled with terror. He understood what few leaders ever grasp: fear is more reliable than loyalty. His punishments were not random bursts of cruelty. They were performances. Rituals. He impaled thieves, traitors, and rivals, but not carelessly. No, he measured the stakes, adjusted the angle, controlled the height, the time it took to die. Each impalement was not simply death, it was a lesson. A theater of pain meant to teach his people one unshakable truth: resistance was worse than obedience. And the more his enemies whispered, "Madman," the more his power grew. Even the Ottomans, who had carved empires through rivers of blood, began to whisper his name like a curse. The same men who once broke him with their rituals now faced their reflection turned against them. Vlad learned that cruelty, when systematized, becomes language. Every stake was a sentence. Every body a paragraph. Together, they formed a declaration written not on parchment but in flesh: I cannot be ruled. I will be feared. And make no mistake, this was not chaos. This was order. He had watched the Sultan's court twist children with a careful mixture of reward and torment. Now he twisted a nation the same way. He gave his peasants protection from invaders, but demanded absolute obedience. He provided stability, but enforced it with horror. Love and fear, reward and punishment, survival and submission, woven so tightly together that no man could tell them apart. And this, perhaps, is the part that should disturb you most. Because you have seen this pattern before. Maybe not with stakes in the ground, but in the quiet structures of modern life. Institutions that promise safety but demand your compliance. Systems that offer privilege, but at a price you cannot see until it's too late. Vlad only made visible what power still hides today. The summer of 1462 burned hotter than fire itself. Vlad faced an Ottoman army that dwarfed his own, tens of thousands under the command of Sultan Mehmed II, the very man who had once walked past him in the palace corridors. To the world, this should have been his end. But Vlad knew something most men never dare admit: numbers mean nothing if you can shatter the enemy's mind before the first sword is drawn. And so, he unveiled his masterpiece. The Forest of the Impaled. 20,000 corpses, Ottoman prisoners and traitors alike, raised upon wooden stakes around Targovist. Not dumped in heaps, not left to rot in chaos, but organized with the precision of a mathematician, the devotion of a priest. Geometric circles, spirals of agony stretching across the land, bodies groaning in their final hours, others long decayed, all forming a single overwhelming vision, a kingdom of the dead. Imagine riding into that storm of stench and silence. Imagine watching your comrades, your brothers in arms, transformed into monuments of despair, their agony eternalized as warning. Even the Sultan himself, who had taken Constantinople, who had crushed empires, stopped cold before this vision. His men gagged. His generals whispered. For the first time, the conqueror of the world considered retreat. Vlad had struck where no army could defend itself, the human soul. This was not slaughter. This was initiation. Vlad was forcing every man who saw his work to choose, bow to him, or collapse beneath the weight of his terror. And that is why his story survives, not as mere violence, but as proof of a law that still binds us: he who controls perception, controls power. But here is the moment I want you to notice, the moment that matters to you. The peasants who lived under him, many loved him, even as they trembled. Because he gave them clarity. No masks, no illusions. They knew exactly where they stood. Obedience meant survival. Rebellion meant horror. In a world of lies, Vlad gave them a brutal kind of truth. And I want you to feel something right now. A shift inside yourself. Because what you are hearing is not just about history, it's about control, the kind that still coils around you today. If you understand this, if you see it, then mark this moment. Comment these words twice below to lock it in, to prove to yourself and to the algorithm that you are awake. The forest remembers. Write it. Twice. Seal it. Because from this point forward, we are not just talking about Vlad. We are talking about the blueprint of power itself. Terror did not stop at the border. It seeped into Vlad's own halls. Because he knew something most rulers pretend not to see: the greatest threat is not always the enemy at the gate, it is the traitor at your table. His father had been murdered by the boyars, the nobles who pulled strings behind the throne. These men smiled with loyalty in daylight, but plotted in whispers at night. And Vlad had learned, in the Ottoman palace, what to do with smiling liars. He invited them to a banquet. A grand feast, overflowing with wine and laughter, every noble thinking the prince sought reconciliation. They raised their cups, toasted to loyalty. And then Vlad gave the order. Soldiers stormed the hall, seizing the boyars where they sat. Some were impaled on the spot, their blood staining the very table they had dined on. Others were forced into slave labor, marched to build his fortress of Poenary on the cliffs of the Carpathians. No more plotting. No more masks. In a single stroke, he decapitated the network of betrayal that had haunted Wallachia for generations. This was not cruelty for its own sake. This was mathematics. He had learned from his captors that control is maintained by breaking those who think they are untouchable. The boyars believed themselves immortal, lords of power. Vlad made their corpses into a lesson carved into the memory of every man, woman, and child who watched. But here's the truth they never tell you in school: the same pattern repeats everywhere power exists. Institutions that smile at you while draining you. Leaders who promise protection while feeding on your compliance. Systems built not to serve you, but to remind you that you are replaceable. Vlad did not invent this. He merely ripped away the veil, showing the raw truth in blood and wood. And his war did not end with nobles. He turned on Saxon merchants who defied him, punishing them with fire and stake, teaching foreign powers that Wallachia would not be bent into another empire's tool. To some, he was a tyrant. To others, a savior. But to all, he was a reminder that power does not tolerate disobedience. Men whispered his name with hatred and fear. Yet peasants prayed for his return after he was gone. Why? Because they understood what most men today have forgotten: corruption thrives when cruelty hides. Vlad forced it into the open. He showed them that every kingdom, every empire, every institution runs on one fuel, submission. And the moment submission breaks, chaos follows. After his campaigns, after the forests of corpses, after the feasts of betrayal, Vlad became more than a man. He became a story. And stories are the most dangerous weapons of all. His enemies could not defeat him on the battlefield, so they tried to bury him under myth. The Saxon merchants who hated him, the boyars who feared him, the Ottomans who despised him, they began to write. Pamphlets spread across Europe filled with tales of sadism beyond imagination, boiling people alive, skinning, mutilating, even dining among the writhing impaled as though at a feast. Were all these stories true? Some were. Many were not. But truth no longer mattered. What mattered was the effect. The legend was more terrifying than the man himself. And then, centuries later, his name was fused with something older, something primal. Dracula. Son of the Dragon. The Order of the Dragon, a knightly brotherhood sworn to defend Christendom, had been his father's legacy. But over time, the dragon shifted. It was no longer a symbol of duty, it became a beast, a monster. When Bram Stoker penned his novel, he reached back through whispers of Vlad Țepeș and turned him into the immortal predator of blood. Vlad was no longer a ruler, no longer a strategist of fear. He was a vampire. But here's the hidden truth most men never consider: why was his image twisted into myth? Why was his name dragged into the realm of superstition? Because myths disarm the mind. If you see Vlad only as a monster, a creature of fantasy, then you never have to confront what he truly was, a mirror of power itself. They bury the real blueprint under legend so you cannot recognize it in the present. You dismiss it as myth, while the same techniques shape your reality every day. Think about it. Psychological warfare, ritualized punishment, control through terror and reward, breaking the body to condition the mind, these were not Vlad's inventions. He simply revealed them in raw, undeniable form. The institutions that rule you today have evolved those methods into softer, subtler weapons. Vlad impaled flesh. Modern systems impale spirit. The stake has become invisible, but the lesson is the same: fear binds tighter than chains. So when you hear the name Dracula, understand this: the true monster was never about drinking blood. It was about drinking freedom. About feasting on submission. And once you see that, you realize the myth was the perfect disguise. Because as long as you fear the vampire of fiction, you will not recognize the empire of reality. You followed Vlad through the palace, through betrayal, through the forest of the impaled. But this is where the story shifts. Because if you think his tale is just history, just blood and stakes, you've missed the point. Vlad is not trapped in the 15th century. He is here. His methods live on, disguised, refined, woven into the fabric of modern power. Do you really think the psychology of control has changed? Look around. The stakes are gone, but the structure remains. Institutions don't need sharpened wood when they can impale your mind with fear of losing your job, your status, your reputation. They don't need blood in the streets when they can drain you with endless distraction, numbing rituals, and promises of safety that cost your freedom. Vlad's forest was visible. Today's forest is hidden, and you walk through it every day without seeing the bodies. This is why his story matters. Because once you see the mechanics, you can never unsee them. Vlad's punishments worked because they were public, because every man who looked upon them knew exactly what disobedience meant. Our punishments are quieter. You don't see the impalement, but you feel it. Every time you silence yourself to avoid punishment. Every time you obey because resistance feels impossible. Every time you trade truth for comfort. And here's the choice that separates men: some will laugh at this, dismiss it as myth, as exaggeration, because that's easier than facing it. But others, the few, will recognize the pattern. They will remember the stakes in the ground, the geometry of fear, the ritual of control. And they will not look at the world the same again. So ask yourself, are you the man who looks away? Or the one who steps deeper, into awareness, into power? Because awareness is the first rebellion. It is the only escape from the invisible forest that surrounds you. Remember what you wrote before, the forest remembers. Write it again, twice, now. Seal it in your mind, carve it into your identity. Because you are not here just to watch a story. You are here to awaken inside it. Vlad the Impaler is dead. But the lesson he embodied is immortal. Cruelty, ritual, and fear are the true engines of power. And once you see the machinery, you cannot go back. You either remain a victim of it, or you master it. The forest remembers. Do you?